Pro mountain bikers get paid to ride their bikes for a living. Sounds good, eh? But what can regular mountain bikers learn from how the pros do it to improve their own riding? It can be easy to fall into a trap of just riding what you're comfortable with and what you know you can ride. But actually pro riders don't have the luxury of that. They have to make sure they're trying to minimise their weaknesses all round and build their strengths as well. So I think most riders can take a bit of inspiration from that and try and address your weaknesses, and that could be fitness or skills or whatever, and just see what it is and try and improve that. Ways of doing that, I guess you could watch some of our skills videos or even learn off a pro skills coach. Back when I was racing, a while ago now, in the sort of 2000s, the pro downhill racers, it was very, very rare for them to have any sort of coaches, whereas now there's lots of skills coaches, fitness coaches, even mental coaches that work with the pros to make them the best they can. So pros often identify maybe it is like the mental side of things, and they'll go and get someone to help with that. So luckily everyone can have access, if they don't mind paying a bit of money, to get a professional coach to just look directly at their weaknesses. So that's one thing you can't really do from our videos, is you might be able to learn skills, but you don't know exactly what your weaknesses are. So professional coaches are very good at that, pointing out what it is that you need to improve, and that will hopefully change your riding all round as well. Trying new things. When it comes to bike setup, it can be kind of comfortable and easy to get your bike set up kind of there or thereabouts and then just ride it as it is. But you'll find that a lot of the pros is trying to extract as much as they can from the bike. And it's not always about speed. What I've noticed in the years of enduro starting to take over is actually comfort and sort of compliance as the words that have taken over as well. Because if you've got to try and ride that bike fast all day long, it doesn't just have to be like this bone shaking machine. It's got to be something that actually lets you physically perform properly all day long as well. Pros do get to try out some exciting bits. I remember in my pro days, I got to try out quite a few prototype parts. And they don't always work, to be fair, so it's not always good news, but it's quite cool to have bits that no one else in the world has. Don't be afraid to try out different suspension settings. It might be worth making a note beforehand where your clickers are. And actually, if you go on the manufacturer's websites, you'll find some really useful guides that will give you a certain amount of clicks from fully closed for a base setting. And then I'd say maybe go from there. There's also different things you can try with your bike. It might be a case of bar height. I did that recently where I tried out a Dakota Nauta style bars. And I kind of surprised myself. I've been stuck in my ways maybe. And actually I found that a higher set of bars is actually really comfortable, and it felt really fast to me as well. So that's something that I'm trying to do with a lot of my bikes, at least trying to get the spaces underneath the stem to rise things up a little bit. But yeah, I would say try things like tyre pressure. It's worth trying things out to see if it works for you. Some pros have even gone to the extreme levels of making their own bikes, which is probably a level above what most of us are capable of doing. But the Athertons obviously designed their bikes. Nico Mullally designed his own frame and got it built, and has actually had some great success himself. Asa Vermette and Angel Suarez riding that bike really fast. And even back in the day, Nicolas Villars, one of the greatest racers of all time, designed his own V Process bike. Now, I've spent a lot of time out in the horrible weather, making sure I'm getting my training or even the riding done in the week, especially when I was a pro. But there is an old saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. And I can tell you that is not true. Even if you've got the best clothes and you're out there for a long time, you're still going to get wet and probably cold as well. But being prepared to ride in the worst of the weather, having a good setup for washing your kit when you get home, so everything as easy as possible, does make it okay and a bit more sort of tempting to get outside, and even if you do a short session, get out in the worst of the weather. Or sometimes having a plan B, having a turbo trainer set up, getting yourself in the gym. I used to make sure I ticked off a certain amount of training sessions, and I tried to stick to the exact days as much as possible, so that most of the time I did get out there and do the worst of the weather. But like I say, sometimes having a plan B is good. Also, in the worst of the weather, you'll quite often find that the pros actually off to other countries. There's lots of pros that have gone on not just sort of training sessions, but they've actually moved to different countries. Back when I was riding, Southern California was a popular place to go. You'll find a lot of downhill pros and BMX pros hanging out in Huntington Beach, because you can ride a road bike, a mountain bike, or ride the trails, ride sheep hills all day long. Nowadays, it seems like Queenstown in New Zealand is the place to go because obviously it's their summertime in our winter in Europe. So lots of the pros go down there and get a really good amount of riding, but also get some racing down there as well. Fly back to the Northern Hemisphere for when the racing starts. Pros often make quite a big effort to actually try and vary their riding. So not just where they're riding their bikes, but also the style of riding as well. So trying out different types of bikes can really add to your skill levels. Someone like Harriet Harnden has won titles in things from cyclocross all the way over to downhill. So she probably is a bit of a unique case, but she's got brilliant all-round skills. And we are seeing a lot more of those sort of people nowadays. Actually, people like Matthew Van Der Poel, Tom Pidcock are just great all-round riders of whatever they do. But I think cross-training on different types of two-wheel machines is great for fitness, literally training, but also just two wheels is two wheels. I think it's great for learning how they react. But also I think it's really important for some riders to try and keep things fresh. If you just do one thing over and over and over, eventually you're going to get bored of it. So lots of pros ride things like mini motorbikes, proper motocross bikes, road bikes as well, not just for training, but just a bit of variety. Someone like Phil Atwill can be a bit of a magician on any bike he rides, but even when he's just riding his downhill bike, he's not just doing downhill laps by any means, he's doing crazy tricks in the car park. If you put supermarket petrol in a Formula 1 car, it's not going to run. Same goes for pro riders, and actually same goes for us too. So pros are normally really good at keeping on top of their nutrition, and not just race weekends, so making sure in their training that they're fueled up properly to get enough out of their training basically. I have seen Nino Schurter use, they have rice and olive oil for breakfast race morning, which I thought was pretty interesting. But you don't have to go crazy with your fancy nutrition plan or even get the really expensive bars and gels if you don't want to. For me, it's more about making sure that I'm fueling enough when I'm riding so I don't just run out of gas completely. It took me too long to realise this. In my early days of being a pro and training, I just thought you just went hard when you rode on my road bike in the week. But actually, you need to keep fueling the ride, otherwise you won't get enough duration out of it. So nowadays, if I'm going for a ride, gentle or not, I'll make sure if it's anything over half an hour, I've got some fluid with me, so water, and then anything over an hour, make sure I've got some food with me. It doesn't always have to be bars, although nowadays you can find these pretty easily in supermarkets, these kind of, what's it, a protein flat jack. So it's pretty good, but also I do rely on things like jelly babies or even sandwiches stuffed in my backpack to make sure that I get a good duration of ride and then a good level of fitness out of it as well. You do see a lot of the top pros at the races trying to harness technology to their advantage. So I'm sure there's lots of us, amateurs, who use things like Garmin's or GoPros to record their ride. But actually, GoPros, if you look at the downhill races, particularly when they're practicing, they'll be recording their practice runs and then reviewing them down the pits to compare lines with teammates or just remind themselves of the course before they race. So it's kind of really studying what they do this. They're not uploading it to YouTube, although actually I'm saying that. Some of them do, of course. There are plenty of pro vloggers out there as well nowadays, but that is super important. Lots of cross-country racers will be using computers to track exactly what they're doing, so paired with heart rate monitors and power meters, so for their training to measure exactly what zone they're in to make sure they're getting the most out of their training, but also so they're not overreaching in the race. Then going down, I guess, the more kind of specialist routes, they're actually kind of consumer friendly as well. You've got things like Shock Whiz and the Tyre Whiz from Quark, which are measuring your tyre and your shock pressure for performance. But also now you have things like this BYB Chrono, which is a super high-tech timing system. So with a GPS and accelerometers and all sorts of sensors in here, you put this on the bike and you have a start and a finish sensor, especially for downhill. It will give you a really accurate time. And then once you've done a few of those runs, you can see where you may be quicker or maybe where there is time to be made. So you'll see these being used a lot in practice as well. So when downhillers go out in the off season and they're wanting to try and test products or just try and put themselves to test against the clock, these are super accurate. But of course, on the downhill circuit as well, we're seeing a lot of telemetry. So I've used this just this year, where you put this system on your bike and it tells you exactly what your suspension is doing, so you can get your bike set up as perfectly as possible for that track. Prioritise riding. Of course, this seems like quite an obvious one. If you're a pro mountain bike rider, you've got to spend a decent amount of time on your bike, but it also means that you will probably have to sacrifice some other things. Plenty of times in the year where you just can't leave and go on a family holiday or go out with your friends. So it's trying to organise your life around being good on a bike, I suppose. I think we can all take a little bit of inspiration from that. We can always probably find an extra hour a week where we're scrolling on our phones and we could be out riding. But actually, there are a lot of pros that have actually prioritised their riding so much, they've moved somewhere to put them in the right environment to be able to ride their bike. I know the Athertons did this, they moved up to Wales to be right where the good riding was. But Andorra, it's a very small mountainous country with tax benefits granted, but there's a lot of pros there. Greg Minnaar, Loic Bruni, Laura Spurgier, Tom Pidcock, all live in that very small place. And we're up here in the Tweed Valley in Scotland, loads of good riding in a really small area. There are plenty of pros that prioritise their riding so much, they've moved down to that valley. One of the nicest perks about being a pro rider is also getting fresh bikes. Lots of riders actually just get like a refresh of a frame in the year, or sometimes 2 or 3, just to make sure it looks nice and shiny and new. And actually a lot of pro racers have a race-only bike that their mechanic looks after, and then they have a training bike for in the week at home. So that's quite nice, isn't it? I'd like to have 2 identical bikes, save one for best. Let us know if you've learned anything else from the pro racers down in the comments down below. Hopefully, even if you're not trying to be the best or the fastest, I do think there's some inspiration we can take from them. And I love watching them race anyway, just to check out what they're doing on their bikes, and love, especially, you know, I am an ex-pro down a race, so I love watching that racing and seeing what the new school of riders can do on their bikes is pretty incredible. Thumbs up if you love riding your bike and you don't have to do it fast all the time.